We're going to wait just a couple seconds for everyone in our waiting room to start trickling in, and then we will start. Okay, so we're going to keep letting people trickle in as they come. But let's go ahead and start our conversation. We're so excited to have you all here today for a really special Unplugged as far as part of our Veterans Highlight in November. I am Catherine Lewis. I go by Katie. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Director of PR and Content at Diversability. I'm also a disabled veteran, so this is a subject that is near and dear to my heart as my lived experience intersects with today's conversation. Before we get started, I want to share with you our flyer for tonight. Very brief visual description. A light blue graphic with navy text and a navy, teal, and orange gradient accent at the top. Below the gradient is navy blue text, Diversability Unplugged, Disability, and the Veteran Experience, above 3 round headshots. From left to right, Kira McLean, she, her, Procurement Technician, Bain Jones Army Hospital, Alex Zirkenbach, he, him, Executive Director, Adaptive Training Academy, and Kyle Noonan, he, him, bassoonist, Anchorage Symphony. Beneath the pictures to the left is a navy banner with white font. Moderator, Catherine Lewis, Head of Content, Diversability, along with a round picture of her. To the right of the banner are the words 7 p.m. Eastern Time, November 15th, 2023. ASL interpreters and cart will be provided, an RSVP at the link below. At the bottom is the Diversability logo and the Interpreter Now logo. So thank you all so much for being here. I am a white woman with long dark hair over my shoulder. I'm wearing dark glasses and I'm wearing a white sweatshirt. And behind me, I'm sitting in my office where you can see some of my decor. Before we get started, I want to introduce to you our panelists today. We're still waiting on a couple of unexpected changes and complications with a couple of our speakers. Hopefully they're able to join tonight. But for now, we have Kyle and Alec. Can you please each introduce yourself to our participants for this evening?
Yes, I can. My name, like Katie said, I'm Kyle Noonan. I'm a white male with medium length brown hair and a beard and glasses, wearing a blue button-up shirt, and you can't see the rest of my house, but I just have a white wall behind me.
Thanks so much for that introduction. Alec, can you please introduce yourself to our attendees?
Yeah, sure, happy to. The name is Alex Zirkenbach. I'm a white male. I'm sitting in my office as well. I'm wearing a dark blue shirt. I have my background blurred, and I typically have dark brown hair, but I have bleach blonde hair. I've had that since February. So poor choice with the Barbie movie this year. But yeah.
This is Katie. That's hilarious. It's always nice to be creative, so definitely love that. Let me unshare my screen so we can focus on our panelists. Okay, so I'm so glad you're both here today. This is a really unique conversation. We haven't really had this type of event before with our organization, highlighting the disabled veteran experience and that intersection. Just to get us off right off the bat, can you both talk about a little bit how disability shaped your experience as a veteran, and also how being a veteran has shaped your disability experience?
Ooh, jumping right in. Okay. Well, I am very recently a veteran. I just left the Army less than a month ago, so I'm still navigating a new world. And I actually served with Catherine Lewis in the Army bands. And so finding a way to include everyone and get everyone to be able to participate was a unique experience, to be honest, since it's kind of difficult sometimes when it comes to the Army and it's hard for them to address disability. And so I'm hoping to actually learn from this as well a little bit. And I forgot what the other part of the question was. I'm so sorry.
No, this is Katie. How did being a veteran shape your disability experience? How has that transition? I feel like the transition from service to civilian is such a unique one in and of itself, but also how does that intersect with the disability experience for you?
Mm-hmm. Kyle again. And it's been a very a big knowledge dump where I'm trying to retain and keep a lot of information because there's so many different resources that were given to me as I was transitioning out that, again, playing catch up. So I guess the one fun one that I remember is I learned that there is a resource, I pulled it up earlier, of a group called Canine Companions that came and talked with us, and they try to do their best to train up service canines to help different veterans with disabilities. I don't remember exactly what all is covered under what the canines can help with, but that was my favorite one that really stuck out to me because I'm a huge animal lover. I have 2 cats and 3 dogs, so big animal lover over here.
Love that. Thank you so much for that answer. Alec, can you kind of talk about your personal experience with that intersection and how they really impacted one another for you?
Yeah, we were talking before we started, and Kyle said he's a new veteran, right? You've been out 1 month, and it's but I actually, I've been out since 2013. And I think new veterans are the ones that I don't want to say worry about most, but that I have a concern for, as a fellow veteran, for Kyle, making sure that he finds support and has a community to go to. And I think, Kyle, you're in a symphony there in Anchorage. Is that correct? So it seems like maybe you've gone from a similar community inside the Army to outside the Army, which is great for you. But I worry about a lot of veterans that leave the service and don't have that community, because the military is a completely different it's a different world, right? It is different than the corporate world. It's different than any other community, different language, everything, structures. And then when you leave that, that's part of your identity, your everyday, how you act and who you interact with. Layer on top, having a disability, that's 2 different communities that are, you're a part of, but leaving the active duty service is really challenging. For me, I think being a disabled veteran, which is honestly kind of tough for me to say. I don't necessarily, as much as my whole entire world is in the disability fitness world, I don't day to day identify as somebody with a disability. I think, I don't say that, and I'm not trying to not be a part of the disability community, but I think I don't wear any adaptive equipment. If you saw me on the street, you wouldn't know I had a disability. And so it's not visually apparent. And so it's interesting, but I think my disability has let me stay more in touch with the veteran community, because, I still get services from the VA, and I'm around more veterans because of that disability. And I, still keeps me in touch more.
This is Katie. You bring up a really interesting part of that kind of duality, where the military and the service is often so ingrained in our identity. And when we're separated from that, it can be really difficult. And for me, I don't know if either of you have experienced this, but coming out of service as a disabled veteran who had some pretty profound experiences with disability. I was not able to come back into a profession that mirrored what I was doing in service, that was now inaccessible to me. And so I was really kind of taken aback and kind of caught off guard by a world that I didn't know was vastly inaccessible. And I think that, Alec, you really touched on a reality that many veterans experience when they come into the world, having left service, especially with a disability. How do you grapple with that, and how do you recommend fellow veterans that have had that really difficult transition and that kind of, I don't want to say identity crisis, but it's the closest thing that I can really describe that it was for me and many others. Can you really speak to that?
I think it's really important to find some other community support, and it doesn't need to be a vast, huge, huge community, but just some other community support, other connections, social connections are really important. I was able to find that through the fitness community, through functional fitness gyms. And that's honestly really did save my life, was finding a gym that just had a support network, seeing the same people every day, going around the same classes. That's really what did it for me, was having that support. And I found that at multiple different gyms. And that's why I am in the disability fitness community now and provide adaptive and inclusive fitness education to trainers. And I think it's so important that gyms around the world have trainers who are able to work with people with disabilities and create a community structure. But it really is important to have some other type of support and structure and community there for you. So like I said, Kyle still has, a symphony, a band of sorts. I know that's not the right lingo whatsoever, Kyle, I apologize. But, you have other people that are interested in something similar. And it could be a sport, it could be fitness, it could be recreation. But I think finding something where you can find some type of connection and some social structure is really important.
This is Katie. I think that's really profound advice. That community, honestly, you talk about how that saved your life. And I'm very much definitely in the same boat as you, that ironically enough, the disability advocacy community is what really gave me purpose in a world that felt like there wasn't anywhere to go during that identity shift. Kyle, can you kind of talk about that for yourself, or for those that you have worked with or been around that have had these kinds of experiences as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, Alec, for bringing that up, because you're absolutely right. I got somewhat lucky in my experience, in the fact that there was a pretty big overlap where I was still in the Army and also playing with the symphony. So it was some very long days and nights. But that community I was already involved in before I even left for like a year or two. So it might even be a good idea to suggest to people to like do some overlapping if they know they're getting out, or even if not, it might still be a good idea to just find some communities in the area that you're in, whether it be physical, artistic, whatever brings you joy. And that building that connection is just, like you said, life-saving. And having the orchestra has just given me so many new friends, so many new people. It keeps me doing stuff almost constantly, whether it's the symphony or the opera or Nutcracker's coming up next week. So I think, yeah, finding a way to connect with the community even before exiting, if that's an option for anybody here, I would highly recommend that.
This is Katie. That's really sound advice from both of you. Thank you for sharing kind of how your experiences were kind of making that shift. Now I want to talk about the elephant in the room, that disability identity that so many of us struggle with, especially veterans. What I have found in my experience with fellow disabled veterans is that disability is a really difficult identity to embrace and accept. And there are a variety of reasons for that. There are a variety of things that contribute to that difficulty. And I'd love to talk about why you think that is difficult. You know, Alec, you already talked about how you don't readily identify with that label. But many of us could, you know, many of us fit into the category of what is defined as having a disability. But for veterans, it can be really difficult for us to say, yes, I'm disabled, and really talk about that experience. Why do you think that is? And can you each speak to whether or not it was difficult for you, and really kind of how you think that could shift in tomorrow's veterans?
This is Alec. I already said I don't know how to answer the question. Like, how do I identify as having a disability? It's like, I don't wear a pin, you know, on my shirt or a cap or something necessarily. But I also, you know, I don't announce it to everybody. My disability is with my right leg, and like if I'm wearing pants and I'm having a good day, then you wouldn't know I had any disability. So, you know, it's kind of tough to answer. But as far as being a veteran and identifying or being able to accept that as part of your identity, it is tough, because I think in the military there's so much of the like, hey, let's just suck it up, let's go about our day, let's do our job. And I would say the number one thing I hear people, if I hear somebody that's about to get out of the military, I make sure to tell them, like, hey, go to medical, get everything that you have documented. Like, don't be brave in this case. Like, if you have a shoulder thing going on or whatever it may be, just go get seen for it, because something may have occurred in the military, and even if it wasn't on an operation or something like that, like, you're entitled to get compensation for having some type of whatever it may be. And it may not be a major significant disability, but if it is, it has to be documented. And so that's one thing, like, I'd recommend anybody transitioning out to being a veteran is make sure you get everything documented. Don't be a hero. Don't try to just suck it up. And I think that stigma does persist through the military, active duty, and then through veterans too. You know, I would guess, you know.
Yeah, this is Katie. Thanks so much for that. Before I speak my piece and my, you know, kind of struggles with that identity and that process, I'd really like to hear from Kyle. Has, you know, disability identity been something that's difficult for you to embrace? Has that even come up in your veteran experience yet? Can you really talk about why you think that might be difficult for veterans?
Yeah, absolutely. This is Kyle again. I I mentioned this a little bit earlier. I have a little bit of an imposter syndrome going on right now, because I don't, at least as of yet, think I technically qualify as somebody with a disability. So I'm navigating this world with a little bit of an advantage, and I understand that. So I'm coming at this from a different viewpoint. And it seems like as I left, it seems like they are trying to set up lots of resources. Like I said, there was so much information given out to me when I was transitioning out of the military, and definitely a lot of suggestions to connect with VA, whether it be for any sort of physical or mental disabilities, trying to see about getting documentation and whatnot. And yeah, I'm still learning too, so it's a little new for me. So I apologize if I'm not as helpful as our friends to my left and right, at least on my screen.
This is Katie. I think that it's an important perspective to have, though, as someone who isn't sure whether or not you fall into this really kind of ambiguous category. In this community, in the Diversability community, we talk with others a lot about how the definition of disability can be very ambiguous and can be very vague and broad, and it's broad on purpose from a legal standpoint, at least in the United States, to give as many human beings the proper resources as possible. And that's amazing, and we advocate for that readily. And at the same time, these really broad definitions can make it difficult for people like yourself, Kyle, or for us, like myself, navigating whether or not, if whether or not you really fall into this category, or where you might fit in this community, or, really grappling with the difference between the conditioning that we have in the military service to just suck it up and to do the job and, rub dirt in it, right? Like I heard that so many times, literally word for word, like so many talk about, their 80-year-old parents saying those things, but we heard it all the time, just keep going. And then you start to wonder when you're on the other side, what does that mean for me? What does that mean for my experience? What does that mean for whether or not I am able to still fit in both communities? And I think for at least me, I don't know if it's true for either of you, I think that was the line that was really blurred for me, was this military mindset and this community where it was like, just do the job and keep going, and the mission mattered more than anything else. And then a community of people, especially as I was joining disability advocacy, where it was a very different narrative, and trying to really kind of reconcile the two. Did either of you have that experience? Have either of you kind of noticed that with those that that are veterans that have had that same kind of struggle? And what advice do you have for veterans who may be trying to figure out where they fall into these identity groups?
I'll go. This is Alec. I mean, if you serve in the military, you're a veteran, so it doesn't matter what you did. I know the military is pretty vast, and maybe most civilians don't understand. There's a huge wide spectrum of what people do in the military, and as we get more advanced technologically, most of the people that are working in our military are working on things that are, I think most people think everybody has a rifle and is downrange, but that's not necessarily true in our military these days. But it doesn't mean that you didn't serve. You did service. You could have been, there's sacrifices that occur for everybody who is in the service, whether you missed holidays or birthdays, or couldn't be home for something and had to be in training, or even live in a place you didn't choose to live because that's where the military told you to go. So you're a veteran no matter what, no matter how much time you spent in there or what you actually did. So you should be proud of that, 100%. As far as embracing the disability pride and the identifying that's a little bit more challenging. It's because then you bring in kind of sub communities of disability too, where whether kind of depends on what type of disability you have, whether it was the origin like an illness, or if it was a kinetic combat injury, or even being in the military and having a non-combat injury, but having something like a motorcycle accident or something that wasn't actually operationally based. I think those veterans probably struggle too with being a disabled veteran, because most people would assume that your disability is based on some type of combat, but it definitely is challenging. I don't know that I have an answer for the disability side of things, but I would love if every veteran just took pride in their service, for sure. Stepping up to the plate and taking that oath is no small feat. So no matter how long you were in for.
This is Katie. I'm really glad that you kind of bring up that that hardline stance of, it doesn't matter what your origin was, it doesn't matter how you came to this place. Service is service. And I've met so many veterans who struggle with the realities of their injuries or illnesses. there's just like there are so many different kinds of disabilities and disability experiences on the civilian side, the same is true for veterans. And I think that's what makes that identity so really difficult and complicated. Some of us, you know, sustained injuries in training accidents, like myself. Some of us sustained injuries in combat, like some of my friends. Some of us, you know, never necessarily had any of those operational experiences, but they got sick, or again, they were maybe in a motorcycle accident. And just like in the civilian disability community, where sometimes it can feel really hierarchical, and sometimes it can feel like almost there's a competition within the community. The same is true for, I think, veterans and that disability experience. That's something that we here at Diversability try to really make clear, that whatever your disability experience, whatever your veteran experience is valid. And hopefully, I think the hope in having these conversations about these identities and the way these experiences shape one another is to help folks that may be struggling find their path, find their way through these kinds of struggles. So it's less of a stigma. At least that's my perspective. Kyle, what's yours? I'd love to also hear from you.
Yeah, absolutely. This is Kyle again. Yeah, I think going back, I know sometimes one of the things that I think I ran into the most was so many people that were separating with me. It was very sudden for them. And so I think that was one of the big struggles, is like, something happened. All right, you're getting medically discharged. And so I think that's really caught a lot of them off guard. And I was trying to see like what they were going to do and try and help as I could, set them up for success afterwards, even as I was also trying to take care of myself. But I haven't heard from any of them recently, mainly because, again, I've been trying to figure out my own life, but connecting with their communities. I know some of them had families, so they had some support there. Some of them already were in contact with companies to help them get set up. And it seemed like a lot of them had a lot of plans and were kind of already thinking of the future, since it was, again, just kind of out of nowhere. And I lost my train of thought. I'm so sorry.
This is Katie. That definitely happens, especially with these short days. I feel like definitely going into the holiday season, everything is kind of wild right now. So no harm, no foul. Definitely understand that. This isn't one of the questions that I had planned on asking, but as the conversation is kind of weaving and evolving, you've talked a lot about kind of like the ways that community has really impacted you and changed your lives in positive ways. And it brings up for me so much about how that community empowered me to really kind of take ownership of my life and my own experience in a way that I really didn't before. And I would love to hear your perspectives of how that shaped your kind of reclamation of your own experience, having come from this vastly different way of life. And then creating something for yourself is essentially what, you know, every veteran does in one way or another. Can you give our audience a little bit of perspective on that?
Absolutely. This is Kyle. I think most of you have already heard. I'm a musician. I'm a bassoonist, and I had a nice connection where I was actually served in the Army bands. So my job now isn't all that different. So I got really lucky there, and I know that's not necessarily an opportunity for everyone else, but I know there are a lot of for most jobs, obviously not all of them, in the Army, in any branch, there is typically some sort of civilian equivalent, which might help in a way to kind of just go from sidestep from this job into the civilian equivalent to help that transition, whether it's planned or unplanned. And that's essentially what I did. I went from army band to symphony musician, and that would be a temporary recommendation at least. I don't, if you hated your job, maybe don't do that, but if you just need something, some stability, that might help with dealing with a transition if you haven't quite left the services yet.
This is Alec. Katie, could you reframe the question for me? Sorry, I was listening to Kyle, and then I think I don't remember the specific question.
This is Katie, not a problem at all. We've been talking a lot about kind of how community allowed us as veterans to kind of reshape our trajectory and kind of create something new for ourselves and reclaim our own experience and the way we were going to live our lives. Can you talk about that experience for you and what impact that has had on you?
Yeah, I mean that's really my journey. I run an organization that provides adaptive and inclusive fitness education to trainers, therapists, whoever wants to work with people with disabilities and fitness. I did not study that in college. I was never a fitness trainer up until the point where I was about to get out of the military. It was my own lived experience of having a physical disability and trying to go through rehab, and I had all the care in the world in the Navy, but it was really debilitating, mentally and physically, to try to walk again. Like I mentioned, rehab was great up to a certain point, because you can only go to rehab so much, and then there's what do you do after you leave physical therapy? I had this hard stop in my life where I graduated physical therapy. It was like, yay, like you don't have any more sessions left. Like, I'm like, okay, like what do I do now? Like I'm not even close to what I physically was able to do before this injury. And that's when, and eventually it wasn't immediate. There was a couple months of really dark periods for me, just because I had lost my physical ability. I wasn't doing the job I was doing prior to the injury. And so then I was kind of almost tricked to go to a CrossFit gym. And when I went there, I didn't think I could do anything. And then, the supportive community there really did embrace me and literally and figuratively get me back on my feet. So that's what got me passionate about functional fitness, and a community-based fitness specifically that typically comes with like a CrossFit gym, rather than, nothing against, like your big corporate gyms that you can just get a membership and go to. But most of those places you go to, you just put your headphones in and, you don't talk to anybody else. But, a good functional fitness gym, whatever brand it may be, there's typically some supportive nature. The coaches actually care about who's there and they want to see you show up every day. So that led me to getting into learning about CrossFit, learning how to train CrossFit. And eventually when I got out, I was like, hey, look, there's no other gyms in the area that I see people with disabilities in. And so I just created my own and immediately started a recreational therapy program with the local naval hospital that I was a part of. And so it kind of all fell in place just because I saw an opportunity where there wasn't support for somebody like myself, and just kind of went with it. And like, before we came on this, Kyle was talking about having imposter syndrome because he was a new veteran, and maybe he shouldn't be talking about having a veteran experience being a new veteran, but I feel that way about myself too. Like I'm no fitness professional, I would say. Like I don't have a PhD in some type of physiology. I've just spent time working with other people with disabilities and learning and hearing and watching and trying different things. So that worked. That was great for me. I know I would say lucked into this path that I have. So maybe not, hopefully veterans can find their own path, whether it be through some type of veteran community or something else they're passionate about, that could give them some, positive structure in their life once they leave service.
This is Katie. I definitely had a very similar experience myself, where I had this. It's really funny, Alec, that you talk about like you graduate physical therapy, or like for me, like your post surgery, and you've gone through that 6 weeks of mandatory recovery time, and then you do your little physical therapy, and they're like, okay, have fun with life, and you're a completely changed person and you don't really know what to do. You have no idea. I definitely relate to that. That was definitely my experience. And for me, all of that happened very, very quickly towards the end of my service, because my injury is what caused me to leave service. And so I really had to figure out, okay, well, what is my life going to look like now? And that can be a really scary experience for a lot of us, as we're going through these kind of identity shifts that we've been talking about up to this point. And for me, realizing that the world was inaccessible to people like me, similarly, where Alec, you found that fitness was someplace where you didn't feel like you fit anymore, but you made a place for yourself. And Kyle, where you made your place in the music community that you didn't have before, that became my mission. And just because all three of us, though, I want to say that just because all three of us have had that kind of experience, that our mission became very tied into that disability experience and that military experience that we all had, doesn't mean that every veteran or every disabled person has to have that kind of trajectory. It's something that we talk about in our community at Diversability too, is that just because a lot of disabled folks go into advocacy doesn't mean that you have to. It doesn't mean that your life has any less value just because you want to live everyday life in an accessible world, or you want to live life in a world that has resources for you as a veteran. Those do not have to be mutually exclusive. But I think it's also important for us to talk about the fact that it can be a really empowering thing to make that shift and become your new really kind of purpose in life. Now that we have been really talking about that pride and that new life and making your own way, I want to ask you both about the pride itself. This is something that we at Diversability, it's part of our mission, as part of everything that we do, that we are hoping to help people in this community really embrace the pride of their identity. And just like in the disability community, there also is a great deal of pride in military service. How do each of you see these types of pride comparing in your own lived experience? And are they the same? Do they feel the same to you? That's also a valid answer.
This is Alec. I definitely feel veteran pride, probably more so than my disability pride. And I think I've said that before. It's because my disability isn't visually impaired all the time, which is, it has had its challenges, where, unfortunately, there are, in the disability community, you could face ableism within the disability community, where people are comparing your disability versus their disability, and and that's unfortunate. I don't think we should allow anybody to do that. But that's something external that hopefully we can deal with. And it's, if that person or group is causing that to somebody, then they should probably not be around that person or group any longer. But I think that's something for me that I've never really reconciled, is having more pride in who I am now, as far as being, I don't like the term differently abled, but I'm definitely have a different ability level than I did prior to my combat injuries. So I think I should be more proud of myself, to be honest, for where I am, considering what I've gone through, and give myself some more leeway and some more love. So maybe this is a good therapy session for me in front of everybody. So thank you for that, Katie.
Anytime.
I definitely don't think I have the same pride veteran pride versus, as well as the disability pride. And I probably should,
This is Katie. I don't necessarily think that there is a should to that statement. I think that everyone's journey with disability and whatever identity intersections that they hold is valid and unique to them. This is me asking these questions about pride and identity embracing and really kind of figuring out where we fit into those categories is not my way of saying that every disabled veteran should be a proudly disabled veteran and really hold the same kind of level of pride in that and be active in the disability community and all of these other things, right? It's not our way of saying that there is any should attached to that. And at the same time, we also want to highlight the validity of both types of pride. And, I think that you touch on something really profound, talking about how that is very difficult to have that same level of pride as someone who is a disabled veteran or could potentially fall into that category, even if you don't self-identify as that really, really profound pride that you have in the service that you did. That's something that I struggled with too. I've landed in a different place on that trajectory of really embracing that disability pride. Obviously, I'm part of an organization whose whole mission is disability pride, but that doesn't mean that anyone else should land there. So I'm really glad that you touched on that and want to thank you for really kind of being vulnerable and talking about that experience. That's why we asked the question, because disability pride is complicated. So is veteran pride, particularly those who are were part of conflicts that were really controversial. A lot of Vietnam vets have a lot of complicated trajectories and processes when it comes to veteran pride, whereas modern veterans don't have as much often when it comes to that category, whereas a lot of the folks that we have worked with that are Vietnam veterans, particularly in that era, are very proudly disabled veterans because of the things that they went through and the experience collectively that they had during that time, which is a whole other thing that we could talk about, is that the way that our conflicts and the times in our world shape the both of those experiences, which is so vast and so complex. But that personal journey is still valid. Kyle, can you talk about a little bit of what yours was now that I've soapboxed about what mine was?
Yeah, this is Kyle. I will say my journey was a little different than probably most people in the fact that my initial joining of the service was probably a little bit more selfish than I care to admit, in the fact that I finished schooling and was essentially looking for a way to continue being musical and to perform. So the Army served me in that aspect, which again started out selfish, but as I served, as I met people, as I connected with so many different walks of life, I have I built upon pride of service and those who have served. And so I'm hoping that even if you don't have pride in your service currently, maybe you can see that what you've done is something honorable and that you should find pride in your service, hopefully. And as far as disability, I know that's a tough journey, and it takes a lot of time and a lot of reflection and maybe some reassessing of things that you maybe wanted to do that you can no longer do, and hopefully you can find new purpose and if you're struggling with that, I bet Katie would be more than happy to help point you in the right direction and help you find a community here amongst friends, and realizing that we're proud of you.
This is Katie. Thank you so much for that. Facing that internalized ableism head on is no joke. I think everyone in this community, those who are live, those who are going to, interact with this session later, those who are in our Facebook group and our social community, that is such a huge topic because we all deal with it so much. And the veteran community is not immune to that. And it's definitely part of the Pride journey, acceptance, and really ownership of our new identities and our own paths. It's all really balled up together. We've kind of like made it linear in this line of questioning, but it's really all balled up together. Accepting that identity, really figuring out where you're going to go in your life, what you want that to be, what you want that experience to be, and also, kind of reconciling the realities of an experience that you didn't expect for many of us, for most of us, is definitely part of that path, part of that journey. And internalized ableism is definitely part of it. And I wish that there was like a magic wand that all of us could wave and just make that go away. But it doesn't work that way. And so that's why so many of these conversations are so essential. It's why we love to hear from you, have your lived experiences shared, because the more we talk about it, the more we say the word, like ableism is real, pride is difficult, these things, the less stigma there is, the more we can help others, maybe have better experiences than we did. So thank you both for sharing so much of your own experiences, your own journeys, and for all of our attendees for being here along the way. We have several questions that we would from our audience that I'd like to kind of present to you and have a little discussion about before we leave the event for this evening. The first question that we got was, what made you decide to serve initially? Kyle, you kind of talked about that a little bit. Let's talk a little bit more about that because it's different for all of us.
Yeah, this is Kyle again. Yeah, I mean, I kind of touched on it already, but I'd finished college as a music major, so you can kind of understand the struggles there were in choosing an arts degree. And I was living at home and working as a security officer, just babysitting a building in downtown Cincinnati. And I was doing that by evening, and during the day I was searching for auditions and different things. So I ended up taking auditions for both the Army and Navy bands. And the Army got back to me first. And so I joined them. And like I said, it was a little bit more self-serving at first and kind of grew into something else and became more than just, I just want to be a musician. It became more about like, how can I musically provide for my community, my fellow soldiers, and other branches that were nearby or needed some sort of support musically, whether it be for ceremonies or whatnot. And so it grew from there.
How about you, Alec? This is Katie.
Yeah, this is Alec. I'm similar too. None of my family is military. There was never even a consideration to go into the military. It just wasn't something I even thought of. So I wanted to go to a college out of state and very expensive. My family didn't have the funds for that. And so it was okay, like they have an ROTC and a Corps of Cadets there, like, hey, if you do this, they'll pay for college. And I was like, yeah, sure. Like I didn't really know what that meant at the time. got into it, and then I realized like this is really, it really was for me, and I really did enjoy serving. But at first it was definitely like a financial opportunity that the military provided. And I am still very grateful. The military has provided so much opportunity for me to do everything I'm doing now, and as much work as there needs to be done with the VA system. I am grateful that I still have that, and able to visit bases and get support and things. So, but it definitely wasn't like I didn't see like a TV commercial or anything, or I didn't have I think it's more, it's got to be there has to be some study about how, family, if you have a family member in military, then you have a higher propensity to go in military. But it just wasn't something I even thought of. I grew up in Maryland, right across the bay from Annapolis, where the Naval Academy is. And I went in the Navy as an officer. I didn't even think about going to the Naval Academy. And I drove by that place probably hundreds of times. So I don't know. It's just kind of a weird coincidence.
This is
And
Katie.
Kyle, you should have went Navy band. Sorry, man. That was a poor choice, but I'll let it slide.
He'll forgive you. That's fine. This is Katie. I actually really like that we're touching on the realities of why so many people go in to serve, because I think for a lot of folks, it becomes this like romanticized idea of like everyone goes in to serve because of these really profound reasons. And for a lot of folks, it's just like, hey, I'd like to be able to pay my bills, or hey, I don't really know what else I want to do with my life right now. And this seems like something that can give me direction. And then, a lot of us figure out that we really like it. For me, my grandfather actually was like World War II era. My mom's side of the family is much older, and he had lost his left arm in a cotton gin when he was very young. They didn't really talk about disability then. In the 20s, it was just he didn't have an arm. They didn't label anything. There also weren't resources. So when World War II broke out, he wasn't allowed to serve, but he had been a really highly trained pilot and trained many of the pilots in the Texas area that did go. And it was, when I was a little girl, one of the biggest regrets he always had is that he had trained everybody that did go and never got to go himself. He never got to serve. He never got to do it. And so I remember as like an 8-year-old girl promising that I would do something that he did never get to do. And so as soon as I went through college, I didn't anticipate being a musician, but as that became my secondary passion, I always knew I was going to figure out some way to do both. And so that led me on my trajectory for service. It's kind of like a weird family story that led me there, but it's always something that has stayed with me, that it mattered so much to him in a world that was vastly different than our own. And that led me to where I was. And I'm really grateful for that experience and for his perspective as well. Because, I think most of them are gone. And I took that in with me. So that was really amazing for me to have that. Our next question is, okay, this is a good one. This person is curious if there are any veteran advocacy efforts or issue areas that we might be able to support and help amplify for those who are not veterans. What can non-veterans do to help amplify veteran advocacy efforts and issues that are relevant to the community? It's a really good question. Anyone? I'll go first, I guess. I'll go first this time. Alec, you going? Okay.
You could go ahead, because it's going to take a very thoughtful response to figure that one out. Yeah.
Kind of my first go-to when it comes to a lot of these, especially those who are outside of the community, and the ways that you can begin to amplify the issues, is first and foremost, in a digital world where so many conversations about relevant issues for very specific communities and issues are circulating online, really be intentional about finding veteran organizations, finding creators online who are talking about these issues. There are so many amazing veteran-led accounts on social media who are really doing some amazing work in bringing these issues to the forefront, in educating the non-veteran and non-military public about the issues that are relevant to not only service members, but veterans, and begin to consume that content. Invest in learning about these issues first and foremost. My go-to first step is always awareness. Be intentional about getting aware about the issues themselves, and then begin to share content about these issues as reputable sources that you have found are putting out relevant things. Find the things that really speak to you in a way that empowers you to take action. If let's say if PTSD is a really profound subject matter that you find very interesting and very important, when content is put out about that, when resources are put out, when fundraisers are put out by the content creators that you have found and that you respect, share that. The more you share, the more others are aware. That's a really good first step. Events are also in your local area. Find veteran-led events or organizations. The VA, a lot of posts are really sorry, I'm losing my train of thought, are really, really active in the community. They're very visible. So it's not very difficult to find amazing organizations, people, and creators, not only in the digital space, but in your own local communities, to begin that first step of being aware, having the conversations, and then sharing as much as you can online is a really great first step to go. What are some other ideas on that? Because I bet there are probably some other great options.
This is Alec. You can get, there's lots of good veteran-based organizations, nonprofits that are doing good work. Even ones called like Team Rubicon that are really supporting disaster relief, and that's just being in a volunteer time, put something good towards something bigger than yourself. But yeah, I think you said it well, Katie. That is really challenging, and it's something I'll have to think about more too, is how can non-veterans support veterans. I would always say, if there's a veteran, somebody that served, look them in the eyes and say thank you, like shake their hand if they'll take that. It goes a long way. I don't think, especially older veterans, like Vietnam veterans, Korea age veterans, like you mentioned, Katie, before, like they didn't get a lot of support coming home from those wars because they weren't popular wars. Even the current, Afghanistan war, like those veterans may not have ever been told thank you. Like, they hear it all the time. They see it in the commercials, like the corporations like to tout that a lot, and it's kind of put through our who we are as Americans. But having somebody say thank you directly to you could go a long way too. That's just an individual thing too.
This is Katie. That's awesome advice. I'm really glad that you added to that. That's a really good one. Kyle, do you have any tidbits that you could add of ways that non-veterans can better support the veteran community?
I'm really trying to rack my brain here, and I think the biggest one is starting, like you both were saying, with somewhat educating yourself first and knowing like where are good sources and where you can point people to if they need help, whether it be a virtual community or an actual in-person community in your area, helping outreach through social media. Maybe you have a friend on Facebook or some other app that you may not communicate with very often, but they've served and you're posting these things. Maybe they'll see it and it'll connect with them in some way. And so I will have to do some of my own research on that to be able to answer that better in the future.
This is Katie. That's a really complicated question. This is something we really didn't talk about too much in today's session, but it is, very well researched, especially after in the post 9/11 wars, that there is a greater divide between the military community and the civilian sector, but specifically after, post 9/11, when military installations were closed to the public. I don't know if I think we're all around the same age or old enough to remember a time when, military bases were open and you could go see an air show and you didn't have to have a pass or an ID or this really complicated process of getting a really personalized perspective of that experience. And for the last 25 years or so, that has not been the experience of the average American. And so it seems kind of like a community kind of shrouded in mystery. And that definitely impacts the ability for non-veterans to really know where to turn when it comes to supporting veteran issues. And so I think the more that we can do as veterans to help point them in the right direction, the better that's going to be and the easier it's going to be, instead of putting the onus on that community. The next question actually is directly related to that, ironically enough. How can we create better bridges between the disability community and the disabled veteran community to make that feel like it is more of a joint community rather than two very separate experiences? That's also a very difficult question. Very, very difficult questions. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, this is Kyle. These are fantastic questions. I think just being very deliberate with being as inclusive and like deliberately getting people from all different communities involved in your events as possible kind of goes back to all sorts of different things that we've been saying with like awareness and whatnot. But I think there's just a lot of, what's the word that I want? I'm hoping that, I know there's obviously an awareness from the veteran side of things. And I think we just need to get our civilians more aware. So if we are involved in an event somehow, and we need to remind those civilian counterparts of a way to involve or a way to make it accessible for everyone. So again, going back to awareness, going back to educating ourselves and just spreading different words. So all these things are kind of Venn diagramming, connecting in lots of different ways. So I think if we can be that voice, whether for ourselves or for our fellow veterans, our fellow people with disabilities, I think that's a great starting point at the very least.
This is Katie. Alec, do you have an opinion on that one?
Yeah, it's a really good question too. I think we just need to realize we all have a common denominator, which is having a disability. So, we are a smaller community than those without a disability. So we should band together, be together, support each other. And so, but I do think there should be groups where that is, the people with disabilities and veterans merge together. Like there's benefit to having that connection. But again, we have that common denominator. So there shouldn't be any segregation between us necessarily. I don't have a specific action other than just to humanize each other, right? And realize we're all living our own experiences. And so, that's it.
This is Katie. You make it sound so simple.
Yeah.
It's humanize.
I know it's not, but in the end, I travel a lot with some other people with disabilities doing my work, and because my disability isn't visually apparent if I'm wearing pants, I travel with a wheelchair user. I travel with a guy who had his arm amputated. And it's funny because people will come up to them and we've been places where they're like, oh, like, are you guys veterans? Like, thank you for your service, to the other two people who are not veterans at all. And we just laugh it off. We're like, aha, it's funny, whatever. But in the end, like, all three of us have some type of disability and we're going through our own experiences in life. And so, we can all just support each other. So
This is Katie. That's definitely an interesting story because I think that happens to, as a female veteran, a female disabled veteran, that's definitely, it happens to me a lot. We have to park in accessible parking because I have a mobility device. And if I had a nickel for every time someone thanked my husband for their service as a disabled veteran, I probably would never have to work again, because it happens all the time. And so that's definitely a real thing. To be honest, it's a question that I struggle with, even in the context of diversability and our work here, because we have a very, very large community of people. We reach almost 100,000 people every year. And I would say almost all, like at least 85 to 90% of our community is not in the veteran community. And yet, statistically, veterans are 3 times as likely to live with a disability than non-veterans. And yet our community is so disproportionately non-veteran. And so clearly that's something that I think all advocacy organizations, both in the disability community and in the veteran community, have a difficult time grappling with, even if we don't really recognize it or even notice it, that we do have that common denominator, and yet those experiences and those identities still often, for so many of us, feel so separate. I think that points to a very unique experience in the military. It's a very, very unique experience, a very unique community and a way of life. And at the same time, so is being a civilian living with a disability. That is a very unique experience, living in a vastly inaccessible world. And yet they feel so foreign to one another. I wish I had the answer. It's something that we are striving for. And I would really love, as someone who falls into both categories, I would love to see, more of that union between the two. And I think really for me, at least coming from my own experience of falling within the two and finding profound community within both, is encouraging people to, accept their lived experience, the identities that they hold, and holding space for all of the above. Which is just probably a very long-winded way of saying to humanize everyone, like Alex said. But holding that space for every lived experience, I think, is the way forward for most of us. Really, really, really difficult, complicated questions from our attendees tonight. So thank you for making us work really hard tonight on these very large issues within our community. Before we sign off for this evening, do either of you have anything else further you'd like to share? Any advice that you have for our attendees or for those that will be watching later, on veteran-related issues or disability-related issues?
No, I think I said it earlier, but every veteran served in some way. So if you know a veteran, thank them. Even if they didn't do combat duties, they served the military or our country in some way. Kyle and I think probably the majority of veterans these days go into the military because there's an opportunity. There's educational benefits, there's pay benefits, there's maybe just an opportunity to get out of their hometown if there's no, opportunity there. So, but we all serve, and you should be proud of serving. And I think what I've learned from Katie and everybody here today is that, we should be more proud of our lived experiences and our own disability. It's tough. It's honestly tough to say that term. I wish there was like some new word that we could use other than disability, but yeah, I think we should, those with disabilities should be proud of who they are. And especially if you're a veteran, be proud of both.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Alec. Tiffany, our CEO, says, we always say disability needs a new PR campaign. Absolutely. I would agree with that. Absolutely. Maybe the military should do the new commercials. They seem to be really good at that for the disability community. Kyle, do you have any final tidbits or anything that you would like to share with our community before we wrap things up for this evening?
Yes, this is Kyle. I think no matter what your service history, no matter what your disability, there is always a place for you. Sometimes it's not always where you think it will be or where you'll expect it to be, but there is community. There's lots of different communities. And if you're unsure of where to look, maybe I can reach out and help you. I know my community is probably very different than most people's. I bet there aren't too many military musicians out there, so my community is quite small. But even within that, there's so many different ways to connect with people and for you to find a place for a way to entertain yourself and spend your life and enjoy everything that you can.
This is Katie. Thank you for that. Thank you both so much for being here. I want to give a shout out to our sign language interpreters. Thank you both so much for everything that you do to help make these events accessible for everyone in our community. We love you. Thank you so much for being here. And for all of our attendees, thank you so much for being here live with us. And we look forward to sharing this really important event with all of our community that had tickets for this evening and could not meet with us live. So again, thank you for being here, and we will see you next time for our next event.